The one thing I do want to talk about today was the one program that I really enjoyed over the last week or so was the biography they did on A&E of Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Because this one, it's one of the rare ones where the guy wasn't his own worst enemy, brought almost everything on himself, at various points had all kinds of opportunities to straighten his up, and is remembered fondly as a great talent that fucked up everything. Steamboat, what a nice guy Ricky is, right? He really is. And everybody thinks well of him. And now he has a nice house and a nice wife and a couple of nice dogs. And he enjoys racing his, I don't know, are those midget cars? I think his track had pavement. But he's one of the good guys. You wish that at certain points in his wrestling career, he had not confronted dipshits such as, Jim Herd, and you might have got more of him. But, just what a classy guy that he comes off telling his story, whatever the stories are. He's a very nice, classy individual. You don't hear people just shitting on, thankfully. So the ratings must have been horrible for this because he's such a good person. Nobody probably wanted to see it. Did you see this program?
I saw this program. I loved it. I thought it was great. I thought WWE did a really great job with it, other than the disgusting appearance of Bruce Pritchard later on to try to justify the awful gimmick they brought him back with. But other than that,
God, yeah.
I thought it was really good, and I think the two takeaways are that Ricky Steamboat's a really nice guy that you still root for, and the second takeaway is Bonnie Steamboat must own the rights to her name and likeness, or any mention of her, or anything, or threaten a suit about anything mentioning her at any time, because there was no mention at all about the wife, Bonnie Steamboat.
Well, but now think about this. Does anybody really want to think about her or mention her? Isn't it better that it's just all just left in the past? I want to bring up one thing I noted at the start when I'm watching, because this was another one of those programs that was great for the old video. So if you didn't see it, you didn't bump the ratings up, go back and see it because they used a lot of old Carolinas footage and the really classic stuff. And a lot of people, obviously all the talking heads remarked about how talented Ricky was. And especially a lot of people talk about the way that Ricky sold. And then Ricky Morton is a paragon of selling. And I think I'm wondering which one is the more effective, because they're so unique and so diametrically opposite, but they both look so good. Whereas Steamboat, it's like ballet. It's great. The pain on his face and the body language and the cringing, and it's emotional, but it's like a superhero. He's like a comic book superhero, especially when he's young, with that fucking physique. And whether on offense or defense when he was selling, he's just so graceful, and the arm drags and just everything. And you kind of see him like pow when he's selling like Superman on a comic book cover. Whereas Ricky Morton was almost the antithesis. He was far from a superhero. He was the underdog, the mortal guy, the plain. Look at that cute boy. It was raw. It was visceral. When he would take those violent bumps and snap around. And I think they're both almost classic in their own way in wrestling, is that if a babyface doesn't do something that leans toward one, he does something that leans toward the other, but nobody has done it as good. Does that make any sense?
Makes lots of sense.
And I just, I love that about Ricky was able to pick that up. And I think that's why, can you ever imagine him having been a heel? Except when Bonnie came to the ring with him in WCW.
I once heard him say that his thing was he sold to the back of the room.
Yes. Because you have to project and they can't see your face. Remember, I've said that about the reason why that Jerry Lawler, dominated the Mid-South Coliseum is a big building, is 11,000 seats, but his body language fit his facial expression. If you were in the cheap seats behind him, you could tell whether he was mad, shocked, hurt, whatever. And Steamboat's the same way. It's the body language. And, and just the athleticism. In high school, he already looked like a star. In the pictures, he's a good-looking guy with a look in a group of nerds, right? And because they said his father was in the army and his mother was Japanese, so their individual parents didn't agree on their marriage. It was a mixed marriage back in the World War II days. And he talked about how he had lived all over the world with his dad in the army, but experienced racism from kids and adults. But again, he's the best looking fucking guy in the fucking school, right? And then he said he worked at his father's gas station to save money to buy a car. So he was already a fucking wonderful standout moral character when he's a fucking teenager. And with him, kind of doing that, his girlfriend worked with Vern Gagne's daughter, Donna, and said, hey, my boyfriend ought to be a fucking wrestler, whatever. And somehow he ends up training with Kaz at the barn in Minnesota. So that's, just an amazing series of events that could happen like that. And you would, again, anybody else, we see what has happened to some of the other people that came through Vern's camp, but Ricky never cracked up. He was always a steady person. He's, spends a few months there and then gets to go to Florida and work for Eddie Graham. Holy shit.
Home. That's where he's from, Florida. Home.
Yes. And to work for Eddie Graham, who changes his name to Steamboat in honor of Sam Steamboat, who was one of the biggest star baby faces in the history of Florida wrestling. So he comes in as the nephew of Sam Steamboat in Florida, and the people loved him.
Wish they would have had some pictures of Sam Steamboat in his prime as opposed to one video clip of him at the very end of his career, maybe in Hawaii or something.
Yeah, but the Steamboat footage is hard to come by these days, though. But now this is the shame of it all, Brian. Can you imagine if Vince McMahon had heard about this new young wrestler named Dick Blood? See right there.
Well, listen, wrestling had two chances because for whatever reason, when Tito Santana broke in, his first name was Dick Blood, Richard Blood.
Well, no, but they called him Richard Blood.
Yeah.
But, and that was, Ricky Steamboat, I guess we should say Ricky Steamboat's name is Richard Blood originally. But when they did his promo pictures, they put Dick Blood. I'm like, I can't imagine being labeled with that fucking name. Oh my God. So Steamboat worked perfectly. And that's the thing. Steamboats are on the Mississippi down south in Louisiana. And Sam Steamboat was from Hawaii. I don't honestly know how he got the name Steamboat. Do you? Because it's not really it's not Japanese. Do they have steamboats over in Japan?
I don't know the history of the Steamboat name or the steamboats in Japan.
But it looks like he's a steamboat more than a Blood. Ricky, I mean.
Yeah, I've never met anyone with the last name Blood in my entire life.
Anyway.
His brother is Vic Blood. I mean, just.
Well, yes. Vic Blood, Dick Blood, and Rick Blood, right? Moving along to the Carolinas, And I remember getting results. This was before that I could see the Georgia TV on, because we had no cable up here in like 76. But I remember the results of, Ricky Steamboat and whatever. And apparently Flair had seen him, down there at those tapings and sold him to Jimmy Crockett. And boy, when they brought him in, especially those, early 77, 78, 79, has there ever been a better looking baby face in fucking wrestling? Just the body and the hair and the feet. He looked like if Bruce Lee was actually a grown man instead of 140 pounds.
And you're a Bruce Lee fan insulting him, so that says something. What do you think?
Well, yes, because that was the thing. It was the appeal he had. This is just 2 or 3 years after Bruce Lee died, and he'd been the biggest thing. And here comes this guy who looks even better and is 100 pounds bigger and has that body and is doing, oh my God, it was insane. What were you going to say?
I was going to say something. You said something that triggered something, and then you decided to insult Bruce Lee. So now I don't remember what I was going to say.
He was the best looking baby face in wrestling, is what I'd said. With the physique and the look and the hair and the thing and the blah, blah, blah. And then that's when.
Oh, that's what I was going to ask.
Oh.
What do you think when you hear that? Knowing Ric Flair recommended him and it led to a legendary feud and matches that people still talk about. Same thing happened with you, right? Ric Flair saw you guys in Mid-South and immediately recommended you to Jim Crockett.
Well, yes, but it wasn't the same thing because then I didn't have a legendary feud with him and he never would put me over.
Good point.
Yeah, see, but no, that's it. Flair was a talent scout for Crockett and a representative of the territory because it was the place to go most of the period of time from in the NWA from 76 through 87. But anyway, and he saw that, I can work with this guy. My God, because it's not hard to figure that out. And, that's in the Carolinas. Now Ricky had only, think about this, he only had like fucking 3 years, maybe experience from the start. But that's why the old footage, you can tell on the interviews, he was so soft-spoken and he was still unsure of himself there, but you'd get in the ring and he had the facials and the fire. And he was a natural. And
by the way, that was the only time Bonnie appeared in the documentary, the clip of her.
Yes.
When Flair and Steamboat had the confrontation in the studio, she was one of the women on Flair's arm.
And now, wait a minute. Now, and Beth, Rick's wife, was involved in, but was that a different angle?
I think that was a different angle because I'm pretty sure that was Bonnie in that angle.
Yes. Well, no, but she was boy, if you were a woman that got into an angle on a wrestling show back in those days, you had a pretty good percentage. Ricky told the story about his father trying to hit the ring with a chair on Ernie Ladd.
Oh my God, that was such a good story.
And the thing is, he had told his parents, now I'm going to be okay, I'm going to be all right. But people in those days, not only weren't they as well versed as everybody is today in the inner workings of how wrestling worked, but the young guys weren't going to just sit down with their parents who are going to one show for fucking hours and try to explain this shit. So they just try to reassure them, okay, And his father tried to fucking take a chair in the ring at Ernie Ladd, which a lot of people, I think today would probably, oh yeah, bullshit, he's telling that story. Remember, we've talked about it before, and there's newspaper clippings and reports of it, that when Danny Hodge started wrestling out of the amateurs and in amateur boxing, in his first 6 months in the business, they had him against Angelo Savoldi, right, for the World Junior Heavyweight title. And fucking Hodge's father jumped up on the apron and stabbed or cut Savoldi for what was it, 80-something, 90-something stitches? Do you remember the number of stitches, Brian?
I don't remember the number of stitches, but I've heard the story, and it's not, I mean, for anyone doubting it, it's not an outrageous thing, the idea of anyone hitting the ring or an old person hitting the ring, but specifically a family member that was never smartened up because that was never done. And in this case, he tried to smarten him up, didn't he, in his own way?
Well, yes, he had tried to again to reassure him, I'm going to be all right, Pop, no matter what happens, blah, 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 or whatever. But the guy got seeing this heel maul his son. The guy got fucking overwhelmed, but he fucking stabbed him. Anyway, so then the Steamboat Biography goes into the angles and that was the perfect thing where Flair, they were diametric opposites. Like remember we talk about this is what draws money. Austin and McMahon, Flair and Dusty. The nature boy versus the common man. This was the nature boy versus the fucking, Wonder Boy. He was so wholesome and beloved by everybody. So what are you going to do? You're going to mess his face up. And he rubbed Steamboat's face on the goddamn concrete, and then they sandpapered it. Keith Greenberg was getting on my nerves here at this point. It was unnecessary to stick him in because they had people telling the story that are actually in the business. But Harley didn't cut him. They sandpapered him. And truthfully, I always thought it was fucking Gene Anderson.
Well, Phil, let's just say what he said. He said that he got cut by Harley Race and then sandpapered.
Yes.
Yeah. So that it almost infected the cut in a way.
No, you don't fucking gig somebody before you're going to sandpaper them. That's just insane. But again, did Gene sandpaper somebody else? And this was Harley. Am I mixing my metaphors?
I'm not sure because I could think of a few different people with that sandpapered eye look over the years.
Steamboat said it was Harley anyway, so I'll believe him. Boy, I tell you what, goddamn, that's what they used to do sometimes with burns also. Where they would say if they burned the guy's chest, they'd sandpaper it a little bit and then put the iodine on it. Oh gosh, it looked terrible. But
you didn't have to do it for Ronnie Garvin.
No, because he got singed a bit. But I mean, the sandpaper would be worse. But the Iranian assassin, the Cuban assassin. When it was the Cuban and Iranian assassin tag team, it was Cuban assassin's son, I believe. Which one was it? Anyway, point is, it was Angel the Cuban because that was so many years ago.
Angel the Cuban.
Angel Acevedo was the Cuban assassin. He poured lighter fluid on his chest and set that on fire when he got burned with a fireball, so it'd show good on TV. But that was a little extreme. But anyway, that's this angle. When they did this to Steamboat and it disfigured his face and it took, as Flair said, weeks for months for the pigment to come back. And not only did this get Steamboat over to Carolinas and propel him into the main event with Flair, but everybody wanted, when VHS came in, I think there was originally one person that had this because this was 1977, 78. And when VHS came in on a more regular basis, you would get 47th generation copies of these because everybody wanted to see that. And then the polar opposites. Steamboat does the angle where he rips Flair's clothes off, his custom-made suit down to his skivvies and punctures his ego, deflates his pomposity. That's the way you get a babyface over a top heel. He didn't hospitalize him and put an end to the issue. He humiliated him and made everybody laugh at him. And people saw that as more of a mortal insult to Flair. And, that got Steamboat over. Because you could get over a top guy like that. And then they had the fucking matches, which were, in state of the art. That was the gold standard anytime they got in the ring. But there's never. And did you see one of the clips? Roughhouse Fargo, Sonny Fargo, was on Mid-Atlantic Television. He was a referee over there raising Ricky Steamboat's hand after he won a match. Can you think of two more opposite babyface attractions in the history of wrestling? They're Roughhouse Fargo and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat.
See, I would have loved to have seen a guy like Steamboat brought to Memphis to sit in the crowd and just see Roughhouse Fargo after working with him as referee Sonny Fargo for a while. Oh, you have no idea? Here's how over he is here, and just let him run.
Oh
wild.
yeah. Well, that's what when me and Bobby and Dennis showed up in the Carolinas, Roughhouse was still refereeing for about another year or so. I got to ride with him a couple times. But we would our eyes would brighten up when he came in. We'd talk to him more, and the other guys who had never been there, like, what the fuck? You don't understand. Just book him in Memphis; it'll sell out. Just put his name on the card. He doesn't even need to do an interview because he doesn't. And they're standing there looking at us like we got turds hanging out of our mouth. Anyway, then they covered the Steamboat and Youngblood team, and boy, the emotional part where Ricky got over in All Japan working for Baba, and then Baba made an announcement on television and helped his mother find her family after all those years that they had been estranged. I'd never heard that before, and that was very cool. And he was crying talking about it.
I never heard that story. It's an amazing story. And when you really think about it, in the early 80s, and a lot of guys, you and me, we have a lot of those Japanese magazines from that era. Steamboat was in those magazines, and he came over to All Japan, but you never think of him as being like one of the regulars like everyone else. You have to wonder how things could have maybe been different if he didn't go to the WWF, because you have to think Baba would have wanted Steamboat as much as he could have gotten him.
Oh, yeah. I think he would have been one of the top. And see, I can't say foreign attraction, because since he was half Japanese, he could have been made there. If he'd have wanted to just work probably All Japan and have the rest of the time off, I think. I can't see, because he could work with anybody they brought in. They brought in the best talent from the NWA. The Funks were Baba's bookers then.
They never had a top babyface sell like Ricky Steamboat. So it would have been very interesting to see how it would have affected things.
But, I think if he hadn't, and honestly, I don't think he wanted to, probably, because he is, and always has been a family guy and, wanted to be gone 26 weeks a year, whatever. But I think if he hadn't done the WWF, that would have been, because that's the thing, is that was right about that time. That's when he finished up in Charlotte, because Dusty came in. We've talked about this before. He knew Ricky'd been there for 7 years, and Dusty wanted to go with Barry Windham as his top young baby face. He was going to be the guy, Dusty, but he wanted Windham, and later on that turned into Magnum when Barry took off. But Ricky didn't fit, and that's when, he basically went to the WWF and the Dragon, and they fleshed it out a little bit. I'd forgotten about those martial arts videos he did.
Oh, yeah. How could you forget those?
Well, because, I'm so... Not only was I seeing him on the Carolinas tapes, but then also that trilogy with Flair and that run there. I've concentrated on that. I forgot about the, me in the WWF. But again, looked like a 230-pound Bruce Lee and can carry the martial arts gimmick off and looked the part. And then, again, let me ask you this. Discuss this, as they say. A lot of people say that the Flair or the Steamboat Randy Savage match at WrestleMania 3 is the best match of all time, right? People have said that. I'm not saying just pulling something out of my ass.
They don't say it as often now, but it was said a lot throughout the years, and some people still do say it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, but I mean, a lot of people said it for a while, right? People say all kind of stupid things now.
At a minimum, people for a long time said it was the best WWF match of all time.
Okay. And a lot of people, for the same period of time or whatever, said that Flair and Steamboat, especially the 89 matches, were the best matches ever had, right?
Right.
Yes. And what is the common denominator?
Dave Hebner. No, the common denominator is Ricky Steamboat.
Because think about this. I like Ricky Steamboat versus Ric Flair, especially number 1 and number 3 from 1989, better than I like Ricky Steamboat Savage from WrestleMania 3. Right? That's my statement. And at the same time, I can see where people would like Savage and Steamboat at WrestleMania 3. But did you ever see Ric Flair versus Randy Savage?
Yes.
Was it nearly as good as Ric Flair versus Steamboat or Steamboat versus Savage?
It wasn't as good as either of those, but I actually thought Flair and Savage WrestleMania 8, I thought was a really good match.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying, well, of course it's going to be really good, but that's what I'm saying. If Flair and Savage were the bigger stars, but Flair versus Savage was not as good, in my opinion, as either Savage versus Steamboat or Steamboat versus Flair.
Right, because both those guys had the best in-ring working babyface.
And that's a lesson to be had by the young fucking wrestlers of today. And or sometimes the young bookers of today. When they always want to match up the two biggest stars all the time, sometimes the two biggest stars, what helps them get to be the two biggest stars is because they worked with the other guy and it helped them get over. And or just because you like all three people, it's chemistry. Who fits better stylistically rather than who you like better?
I love the Flair Steamboat matches, but I actually prefer the Savage match. Again, it's the first...
Well, fuck you. I'm never going to speak to you again.
It's the first thing I saw growing up. You know, I saw that before I saw the Flair match. And the arena, the building, the fact that it happened at WrestleMania 3 in that building, it looked incredible. The other thing is, I love the commentary on that match. And midway through the match, Ventura just says, "This is the greatest match I've ever seen." In the middle of the match, he just all of a sudden says it because it hits him, and then it keeps going and getting better. It was different than anything else you saw in WWF typically. You know, Bret Hart and Steamboat would have a good match on a house show, but it wasn't on a big position like this. And the thing they also have in common, for good and for bad, Steamboat and Savage and Steamboat and Flair, I think, were big influences on the style of matches that young guys who were training to be wrestlers wanted to work. Lots of near falls, kick out of things. They took it too far.
Yeah.
It wasn't as smart as what they did, but I think those matches, and a few Bret Hart matches, those were big influences on a lot of the next generation of wrestlers and the style.
Well, and see, here's the thing. I agree with you 100%. The problem was it just influenced the body of work of the performers didn't influence those people. The idea that this is the greatest match that they've ever had in their careers also, so we're going to try to do that every time we wrestle. That's what became the problem. They ignored the context of what got to that point to where these guys were so over and had become such great talents in such big companies that they're finally going to be matched in this major match on this major show. And then they do 14 false finishes. Not in Poughkeepsie on Tuesday. Every week. But anyway, I'll tell you what, I was, and by the way, then clarify this for me, because then I want to get to January 1989, where for about a week and a half, I was actually excited that George Scott had arrived and TBS had bought the company.
Yeah, and if you grew up and saw any of those angles they did in the late 70s, you got to see those again.
Well, yes, and actually, I didn't even mind that, because they were as good the second time around, and most people hadn't fucking seen them. But back up a second, because you need to tell me what the fuck's up with this. Steamboat said that Vince had him drop the Intercontinental title to Honky Tonk Man because he asked for 2 weeks off. He wanted to spend more time with his family, Little Richie. No mention or pictures of Bonnie, but Little Richie was all over the place. No, what was the real deal? What happened? He said we can't leave the Intercontinental belt dormant for 2 weeks. I don't know how Vince would have even sold that in 1988 or whatever it was. What was the real deal?
I don't exactly know. Now, I can see Vince saying that as a line of bullshit for whatever reason.
Well, but Ricky then said, well, then I took 6 months off instead.
And he did. He was gone until WrestleMania 4.
Well, that's why I'm wondering if maybe he didn't ask for 6 months to begin with, and or at least 3 months or something. Because 2 weeks, I know how Vince booked. You didn't defend the title on television in those days. Was he trying to miss a NBC special?
And again, this wasn't on an NBC special. This was on the syndicated show. Honky Tonk Man got the belt. The story throughout the years, and there are people who believe it, people who don't, was that Butch Reed was supposed to get it, but instead Honky Tonk Man got it. This led to a lot of the stuff on NBC with Savage and Honky Tonk, the Hart Foundation getting involved, and eventually leads to the thing where in a few months, Honky Tonk Man refuses to lose the belt back to Savage, threatens to go to TBS, and they rebook everything so that instead of Ted DiBiase winning the world title tournament, Savage does.
It's a domino effect is what it is.
That's right. It's all Bonnie Steamboat's fault. Well,
it's all Bonnie Steamboat.
I'm kidding. My question was going to be, because I know it was the case with Hurd, was Bonnie negotiating for Ricky with Vince? That would be my question.
I don't know. But so the point is, I'm not calling Ricky a liar. I'm saying it, and sometimes we can remember these things, but I think there's some middle ground in there between him saying, I want to take 2 weeks off, and Vince made me drop the belt, so I took 6 months instead. But he wanted to be home more with his family.
And the finish almost looks like a screw job, and it wasn't. But it was such an awkwardly done roll-up with him and Honky Tonk. It looked really bad.
Well, sometimes the cake doesn't quite rise. But anyway, so he's gone 6 months and he goes back. But at that point, Vince is not using him. You know, the old-time promoters, they didn't like people who cracked under pressure and wanted off. So he gave his notice and he left. And that's the thing is, I hate that for the last 4 or 5 years of Ricky's full-time wrestling career, he was still only part-time because he was in such great shape. But anyway, that we get to January 89, and I remember we were still doing a show at the TBS studios on Techwood Drive, but I think they had switched it to where it was nighttime tapings now instead of Saturday mornings. And that's when I found out that Steamboat was going to be Eddie Gilbert's partner against Flair and Wyndham, because I can't remember what interaction Eddie had been having with Barry Windham or how Eddie was in that, but he had a mystery partner. Do you even remember better than me?
Eddie was having issues with Flair and Wyndham, and it led to the mystery partner thing. For a while, it seemed like Eddie, and if there was ever a time where anything was going to happen, 1988 was probably his year. That's the year he runs over Lawler. That's the year he books Continental. There's a lot of sheet buzz coming into him being hired by Turner or hired by WCW. And this was kind of where it still seemed like he was going to get a push, and then quickly everything went to Rick Steamboat. Not that it shouldn't have.
Well, but here the thing is, there's both these things can be true. You just know, Uncle Huck, that Eddie was trying to maneuver himself into the booking position with the new owners, right? Because that's a thing that Eddie would have done. Eddie wanted to be the booker. And it wasn't far-fetched because Dusty was just gone. Jimmy Crockett had been the interim guy. Eddie, I'm sure was trying to muster some forces that would recommend him, with the newsletters or whatever the case, and politicking. And it didn't hurt that he's working with Ric Flair and Barry Windham. And this was before Flair had any issues with Eddie, as I recall. So there wasn't anything personal going on. But they hired George Scott. The first thing that George Scott's able to do is bring Ricky Steamboat in to be Eddie Gilbert's mystery partner. And as you said, they have that match in the studio, and Steamboat looks phenomenal. and he beats Flair, and everybody's fucking jumping up and down. And that's when Eddie kind of got lost. And after the George Scott debacle, as you'll recall, when they went to a committee, Eddie was on it. And that was only 3 months later. And so
then Eddie left the committee because he booked something. Ric Flair booked something for him to lose in Memphis against Ron Simmons. Was that it? And Eddie refused?
Eddie didn't leave. No, Eddie didn't leave. Eddie was invited to leave the booking committee, but he was on the committee after George Scott, and we'll get back to Ricky Steamboat. But after George Scott, the committee became, besides Jim Herd and Jim Barnett, who were going to, and Jody Hamilton, who they made sit in there, and they were going to be regardless of whatever. It had become Kevin Sullivan, Jim Ross, Eddie Gilbert, and help me, maybe not anybody else at that point. And that lasted about 3 months, but the sins of George Scott did worse damage to the ratings because they kept going down, even though the other guys tried to do something about it. So by June and into July, that's when it was the worst it had ever been thus far. It would get worse later. And that's when Flair demanded, make me the booker. As soon as that happened, he still had all the people on the committee working for him, with him, whatever the terminology was, but he was the head guy and made decisions.
And by the way, just to tack it onto this story, when Flair became head of the booking committee, that's right when Rick Steamboat left, right when him and Herd had the problems.
Well, yes. And that's another thing. He's like, what the fuck? Which we'll get into in a second. And now we've lost Steamboat. And look at these numbers and look at these fucking bullshit. But anyway, the problem was then Flair got, as we've noticed, when Rick gets cranky with you, he'll stay that way for a while, or maybe not sometimes on Twitter, but he'll stay that way. He gets a negative impression of you. I think he didn't particularly read the newsletters or have any knowledge of any of Eddie's booking in Continental or in Memphis, or he knew Tommy, Eddie's father was a wrestler and he wasn't being disrespectful, but it wasn't like he came from the Gagne wrestling dynasty to Rick, right? And he's looking at a bunch of people. Kevin Sullivan was the only person he wanted to keep on the committee as it existed because everybody else it was either counterproductive or he didn't particularly feel they had that much to offer. But Eddie, they have a show in Memphis, and since he's on the booking committee, Flair's not there, but Flair sends the finishes. And it was for Ron Simmons, who at that point was getting bigger, but it wasn't Doom or anything yet, right? Ron wasn't main event guy, but still is Ron fucking Simmons. It is for Ron to beat Eddie. And Eddie looked at that and like in Memphis and like as a personal insult, as like a shocking slap in the face. Flair didn't think, I'm sure, any goddamn thing about it whatsoever. Because as he said after the fact, it's not goddamn Memphis, it's fucking WCW. We're on TBS, for fuck's sake. But Eddie took it personally and he changed, I think, the finish to some kind of DQ. I don't know if he turned it around and beat Ron. He might have, whatever. No, maybe he DQ'd Ron since he was a heel anyway. Whatever the fuck. That's when Flair called me and said, hey, you want to be on the booking committee? Because I'm fixing to fucking have an open chair because I'm getting rid of one guy. That's the way Flair, I'm getting rid of this guy or I'm getting rid of the other guy. Once that you know who he's talking about, he'll never name him again. And yes, please. What I'll do, whatever, just tell me when you need me, Rick. I have nothing to do with Eddie, right? So then, goddamn, I know we're meandering here.
No, this is good. This is good.
Well, we'll make up time with a shortened fucking SmackDown review. So then, I'm sitting waiting, right, for a week or two or whatever it was. And then Flair calls me and says, okay, I've told him I'm replacing Eddie Gilbert. He's off the deal. Or I've told him you're coming, be at the meeting Tuesday, whatever the fuck, however he told me. And so then that's when I went and to the first booking meeting was at the actual CNN Center, TBS off or WCW offices. And the boardroom table with Hurd and that old fucking thing. But Eddie had told the story, and I'm not trying to speak ill of him, but it wasn't true, that, well, he didn't find out that he was off the committee until he walked in and saw Jim Cornette sitting in his chair. Well, for one thing, we didn't have assigned seating. When you got in there, you tried to sit as far away from where you knew Hurd was going to be as possible, right? Otherwise, it was up in the air. And secondly, he already knew because he didn't come to a meeting and open the door and I was there. That never happened. Flair told him about it beforehand, and there was ill will between them because of that, because of it was again, polar opposites. Eddie felt that his name and his reputation in Memphis and Continental and the Gilbert family and his reputation with the smart fans and the newsletters for his innovative booking should garner more respect than probably it actually at that point maybe needed. He was very good with especially with getting like Heyman, with getting a lot out of a little. His best talent was still in the ring. He was a very excellent worker and he could talk. But whereas he thought it should probably have a little bit more respect than it did, Flair gave it absolutely fucking none, because to who is fucking Eddie Gilbert to Ric Flair? So he was on the other level of the fuck. Who the fuck is this guy? Kevin Sullivan, I know he's worked for Eddie Graham for 15 years. Who the fuck is this guy?
You bring up polar opposites to tie it back to Rick Steamboat and the experience in Japan. One of my favorite Eddie Gilbert stories is when working for Wing, one of the outlaw groups in the 90s, if we are going to call it that.
Yes.
Him and Doug, and Eddie really didn't work Japan, got on the mic, took off their monster masks, challenged or ran down Mickey Ibaragi, who ran the promotion, and then my favorite part, pledged their allegiance to Giant Baba.
I remember that. They never worked forever, did they?
Never. And Baba, can you imagine when Baba heard that? Like, I'm not hiring these two.
The allegiance to me? Who are they? Who are these people who are allies of mine? Oh.
What a move. There was a series of, we're not going to make this about Eddie Gilbert. There was just a series of bizarre incidents around Eddie Gilbert in front of fans for like 5 years. Just
God damn it. All right. Since here's the thing. I liked Eddie. Doug's a nut. Doug, I've told you about before. He got mad, cussed me on the internet because I wrote the foreword to Howard Brody's biography, right? I wrote, Howard's had an interesting life. Boy, read this book. And then Doug didn't fucking like what Howard wrote about Eddie, so he fucking cussed me. And on the fucking internet, you and your fucking book, you fucking redneck, you can't read a book, much less know what anybody else has written. But anyway, it was Christmas week of 1980. I believe, or was it 81? For the purposes of the story, it matters not, but my records can correct it if anybody wants me to tell them. Tommy and Eddie Gilbert, baby faces, father-son tag team. They're fixing to leave the territory. I think that may have been when they went to Tulsa and worked for McGurk.
79 into 80, right?
Well, but then maybe it wasn't, because I think it was. I seem to remember Killer Carl Krupp was here. That may have put it at 1980.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, the point is, the Louisville Gardens had put a big punch. It's Christmas week, right? They had put a big punch bowl back there with punch for Teeny and for all the boys and the referees, and they'd put some Christmas cake or cookies, whatever the fuck. It's 40 fucking years ago. I don't remember what the food was. I just remember the effect of the punch. Because apparently after Teeny had somebody somehow spiked it, or maybe they took one down in the locker room where Teeny didn't go. They had one down, but some punch got spiked. And apparently, this is what I was told. I was a mere photographer, but I'm shooting Tommy and Eddie's match with the heels. And some guy at ringside, because Eddie was young and gangly in those days, and one of the guys at ringside was fucking hooting at him, right? And Tommy got vocal with the guy back. And then Eddie did too, kind of a little bit, and the fucking heels were trying to redirect it. And the point is, after the match, somehow Tommy ended up going out through, or Eddie ended up going out through the fucking middle of ringside after the fan. Tommy ended up going out there too. I don't know whether to pull him back, and the cops went out there and they're yelling and cussing. And Teeny was hot because she came out and said something to the effect of, the Gilberts have been into the spiked punch. So I'm just telling you what I'm observing. There's the baby faces suddenly have an argument where they go out in the middle of the goddamn crowd at ringside yelling at one of the fucking fans, and then they're asked to fucking, go back to the locker room. And later on, Teeny's like, they spiked the punch. The Gilberts had too much punch. What the fuck? So, the fuck? Anyway, where were we?
We're talking about Ricky Steamboat having too much of Jim Herd's punch.
Yes, because that's the thing. He signed, because he didn't know about this new company, TBS. He was taking a chance on burning his bridge with Vince McMahon, who he'd been working with, but he knew Jim Crockett, who had just sold the company. He knew George Scott, and had good experiences in his career with George Scott before George developed fucking brain epilepsy or whatever caused him to be a complete idiot. But still, it was a chance. So he said, I'll agree to 6 months, and they had to give him a decent money deal. What was it? I don't remember, because it wasn't such and such $100,000 per year, because it was a 6-month deal. So at the time, from the standards at the time, would it have been $150,000 for 6 months, $200,000? Somewhere in there?
I can't tell you, because in so many cases, there's not much rhyme or reason to who got offered what. But whatever it wasn't what he was going to get going forward. Well,
that's the thing, is that, he's brought in and with a favorable booker, and the guy and they don't know the booker is an idiot yet. And the guy says, I'm going to give this guy a big push. He's going to be a top guy. But then, the problem is 6 months later, everything that Steamboat needed to deliver, he did, except the creative decision that the company did and went with of featuring him as a family man, which smacks of Jim Herd, and featuring Bonnie in the ball gowns.
But smacks of Bonnie. I wonder if it smacks of Bonnie, because remember when Steamboat returned.
Well, it smacks of
WrestleMania
it smacks
4.
of both of them. It smacks of like when Vince McMahon got together with Sable. Both of them were smacking. Then this talentless, fucking personalityless bitch gets featured, and it kills the on-air talent that she's with.
Because when Steamboat returned at WrestleMania 4, it was, remember, they had the stuff of him and little Ricky when he was a baby in the ring at WrestleMania 4. So it was starting then when he returned from the hiatus.
Anyway, nevertheless, Steamboat had some of the great matches of all time. He's a model employee. He looked like a superhero again. Even if he wasn't second coming of Farmer Burns and fucking Frank Gotch. After 6 months, he just had a great match with Lex Luger. Whether his booker was still there or not, Flair loved him. All the talent loved him. And not in like, he's our friend, but in, no, this is a guy we want to work with. He makes everybody look better. He's not selfish. He's selfless. and he's still a name, even if you don't want to put him in world title contention. Here's the guy to wrestle for the U.S. title or drop it to a heel, whatever the case. And Hurd once cut his money in half, like he did with everybody else. And no, it's the same thing he tried with us. Same thing he tried with the Road Warriors. It wasn't, you could understand if it was a talent who wasn't producing, wasn't performing the things that they were asked to be done in a entertaining or successful way, if they were the shits, if they were a problem. But no, just being in a company that's not drawing any money for reasons beyond their control, i.e. the fucking ownership, the management, then no, don't cut my money, smarten your ass up. That's what we spent about a year altogether. Me, meaning we, Flair, myself, Kevin Sullivan, all the people that were in the administration during that floating period of time, Jim Ross, whoever, Terry Funk, trying to smarten up Jim Hurd. Don't penalize the talent because you're fucking this place up, because that doesn't sell. If we had just suddenly shit our fucking pants in the middle of the ring and we're producing horrible television shows and horrible fucking matches, and the people at the buildings didn't give two shits about us when they were there, then cut our money. But no, you fucking... Anyway.
Well, remember, too, earlier that year, 1989, is when Jim Hurd met with Randy Savage, met with Roddy Piper, who was about to return to WWF, and apparently gave them both lowball offers. I mean, it all goes back to the same problem.
Well, and here's the thing. Somebody's going to say, well, they wouldn't spend any money then, TBS. Then don't have the fucking meeting. Because what he did every time he did, or then agree to something and go back on your word. Remember, Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson gave notice to the WWF after a year and came back on the promise of Ric Flair that they would be featured in the Horsemen again, the top spot, and that Hurd had agreed to pay them each $250,000 a year. And after they give notice and it was too late to turn back, Hurd fucking rescinds the offer to Tully because he flunked the drug test for Vince, and then cut Arn's money $100,000 because you're not as worth as much without Tully. So he fucked Tully completely and cut Arn's money almost in half before he started because he was a lying sack of shit.
And he didn't even know who Arn was.
Well, and who gave, Arn didn't know who Hurd was. Arn was going on Flair's fucking word because Flair was promised by Hurd. That's one of the first things that went wrong. But to your point with the other guys, if you know who somebody is in the fucking business and you have a meeting with them, you're either going to talk seriously and give them an offer comparable to a job they would be leaving, or you're just exposing yourself as a fucking idiot that they're going to go back to their current employer, to the fucking locker room, and say, this fucking guy tried to give me $100,000. What the fuck? Between ridiculous offers, not being serious, and then lying to guys, that's why the only people that left Vince to go for fucking WCW for the next 5 years were the goddamn people that Vince fired and ran off. Anyway, so then Ricky was gone again. And then, you mentioned this earlier, goes back to the WWF, the full dragon blowing fire gimmick. And I swear, here's what I wrote. Bruce, of course, defends this nonsense.
How though? See, that's the thing. Who was it for? I go back to this like I asked about the women's division. I was a kid. I was 11 years old when he returned. Ricky Steamboat Karate Master was a whole lot cooler than Man Spitting Fire, who they didn't even use his name for a while. They tried to make it just The Dragon, no Ricky Steamboat.
Yeah, while he's wearing a big blow-up pool iguana on his back.
No, he was really, really cool as the Ricky Steamboat of the mid to late 80s, that worked. There was no reason to change it. That was Vince fiddling with something for no good reason, and it helped no one. And of course, he didn't get a push, so it didn't matter. But no, Bruce Pritchard trying to defend that is ridiculous because in terms of marketability alone, the Ricky Steamboat character that he had been up to that point was more marketable than a fire-breathing dragon. For who? Is it for children or is it for adults? Who is that for? Because kids didn't really care about it.
Well, besides that, and here's the other thing also. The fucking, it looks great in a compilation video on television, but at the house show, it was over in fucking, 4 fucking seconds, and then he's got to goddamn rinse his mouth out and shit. But didn't they think, well, what about if the kids try to gargle some fucking alcohol and blow into a goddamn Bic lighter to imitate their goddamn hero? How did they get by with that? I'd a whole lot rather them hit each other with the rubber nunchucks for Ricky the Dragon martial arts steamboat than have fucking 3rd-degree burns from kerosene poisoning or whatever.
Did you hear that story about the first time that the guy they hired to train him how to spit the fire did it outside? All the kerosene went in his own face and his face was on fire.
No, you see, yes, that shit don't always, even if you know what you're doing. I don't. And it's kerosene of some description.
I understand in his divorce, that was the first thing listed. Breath.
Irreconcilable breath.
Irreconcilable breath.
But anyway, so then he goes back to WCW in 1992 to team with Shane Douglas.
Which is wrong. They show him returning at the end of 91 to team with Dustin to win the tag titles when Barry Windham got hurt against
that's right.
Zbyszko and Arn. But they said it was 92 and they said it was with Shane Douglas, which is what he did at the very, very, very end of 92, mostly early 93 until Shane left.
Now that you say that, I do remember Ricky Steamboat and Dustin Rhodes, but that's just for the point where, as Smoky Mountain was taking up a lot of my time, but I knew about Steamboat and Shane because when we did the deal with Watts toward the end of 92 and the February 93 pay-per-view, that's when Steamboat was teaming with Shane Douglas. They were the babyface team, and the Rock and Roll Express and the Bodies came in from Smoky Mountain, and we had that 8-man tag on the syndicated television with the Bodies and Steve Austin and Brian Pillman against the Rock and Roll Express and Steamboat and Shane Douglas, which was an interesting lineup.
And then Shane left, but they were still the tag team champions, so they put Tom Zink under a hood.
Oh, boy.
And they made Ricky Steamboat and Tom Zink Dos Hombres. Basically trying to make it sound like it was still Shane Douglas under the mask.
Did it get dose over?
It was over pretty quick.
It was overdosed. There you go.
And that was kind of the end of Tom Zink and WCW, too.
Boy, talk about trading your house for a tent with... But anyway, and then, he hurt his back and his first serious injury ever. And that's what pretty much puts an end to his career.
How many back injuries have we seen now? From Dynamite Kid, the house show footage that's out there, to what Shawn Michaels claims hurt his back, to the Ricky Steamboat clip here.
Simplest fucking thing.
The bump that hurts the back doesn't look bad at all, and it does all the damage.
But, also, I hate to make this simile, the straw that broke the camel's back. If you've done it, because actually Dynamites may have been that also.
Yeah, that's right.
If you've done enough damage to something and you don't realize that you've done that particular damage, then something slight or not as impressive can be the thing. And, a lot of times just shit that actually just gets you the right way is not as visual as the guy, doing cartwheels over the top rope and landing with his neck in a fucking incinerator. I don't know. But it was I know what he means in that we'll talk about it later on if we ever get there. When we talk about the Clash at the Castle pay-per-view where Damian Priest did the hangman spot with his ankle, and everybody was concentrating on the arm or on the leg because that was what was caught in the ropes. He almost broke his neck.
Yeah, the way he hit the apron was brutal.
Yes, he head first to the apron almost. If that had been an inch either way. But you never know the snap when Steamboat went to push off and he slipped off the rope. Then that causes you to tense in a completely different kind of involuntary way because you're, oh shit. And then when you land, you're tense and it's anyway, that's what happened. But, again, he's living in Knoxville now, which I didn't even realize. And he does the car racing, Hot Rod Steamboat. And they talked about his run as a producer and agent in WWE and the Hall of Fame induction, which he teared up about also. But I remember when we joked about it, well, didn't joke about it, but that Jericho gave him some kind of stroke or whatever when he had that match where he came back when he was 56 and still looked fantastic, but it was a brain bleed that was nearly fatal, and he was in intensive care for 3 weeks. Did we know it was that serious?
Yeah, I remember hearing it was a brain bleed, and I didn't realize,
Well, you and I weren't doing this then.
We weren't doing this, but, I also don't know too much about brain bleeds and the fact that they told him there's nothing we could do. You just got to wait it out and hope that it doesn't kill you. That's crazy to hear.
But I don't know if I remember that I knew that it was this serious as a health issue as it was here. But
coincidentally enough, a lot of AEW Dynamite viewers report brain bleeds every time there's a Chris Jericho segment on the show.
Well, see, now he's a carrier. He's like Typhoid Mary. Never actually suffered from the disease, but brought it on for those around her. But anyway, again, one of the nice guys, one of the rare biographies where he's still working out, he stays in shape, he's got the nice wife, the nice home, saved his money apparently, not on drugs, doesn't have to do indies, and he has cute dogs. The end.
You knew it was going to end well when it started and he's doing an interview in front of his office.
Yeah. You're saying that most people don't just fucking use the security camera in their fucking trailer too.
Well, most of these biographies, when you see the guy interviewed, you're always like, oh, is there a bed in the background? Is that a couch? Where the hell are they? He was in front of his office with an Intercontinental Championship belt behind him.
Every once in a while, they put people in random hotel lobbies, though, just to throw us off.
Yeah, like where was Keith Elliott Greenberg? That certainly is not his office or his house. He was like in a nightclub or something. What was that?
I'm not sure. Well, we don't want to judge. Maybe he's one to knock one back in the middle of the afternoon. We don't know about these things.
That has nothing to do with home decor.
Well, I thought you meant he was in some kind of saloon up there somewhere in the Bronx.
A saloon in the Bronx?
Yeah, really? They got those gin joints up there.
That's right.
I'll tell you.
I just saw something the other day where some family, they bought a house on Lake Michigan, I think. And while redoing the hot tub, they found underneath it an old Prohibition-era tunnel for bootlegging. Like an underground tunnel that was apparently going to several of the houses for whoever was sneaking whiskey over the border from Canada.
See, I thought you were going to say they found some bones of skeletons of some of the bootleggers.
No, boring. That's not exciting anymore.
All right.
Anyone can find bones in a yard. What's
I'll tell you what, sometimes there's plenty of fun. Depends on whose bones and whether you wanted them found. But I'll tell you what, you know what you need to do with your bones, Brian? You need to lay those tired old sore bones down in a sleep that will rejuvenate and replenish you, that will give you rest and relaxation and recuperation. The only kind of sleep that you can get from Helix and our friends at Helix Sleep, because that's the kind of sleep that you need. You need the sleep of the angels. You need the sleep of the peaceful and the tranquil. You need to be floating in a cloud. You need to be wrapped in comfort, and like you were being swaddled in baby clothing and fucking swung back and forth from your mother with a couple of big old tits flopping in your face. And that's the only kind of experience that you can get.
I like what I'm hearing. You could certainly represent me.
Well, that's the kind of experience you're going to get when you take the Helix Sleep quiz on their website, which, of course, as I mentioned, is helixsleep.com. And you tell them what kind of mattresses, because they got so many mattresses. You got to answer some questions because they've got the award-winning Luxe collection, the Ultra Premium Elite collection, the Helix Plus, which is that mattress designed for big and tall sleepers. Now, let's say you're 8'6". They've got a fucking tray at the end that pulls right out, gives you an extra 2 feet to prop your feet on. Or let's say you're 1,100 pounds and you're so corpulent, the people have to roll you in flour and look for the wet spot. They've got one that's extra wide, extra wide. It's extra wide, so you can flop and flop all you want. You ain't gonna come over that edge of that thing, you big and tall folks. And the kids' mattresses, which are designed for growing bodies. And Brian, you set me straight on it. I thought it was something where you could put the bodies on the mattress and it would help them grow. But instead, it's designed for a body that's already growing to sleep on it.
That's right. That would be a body-growing mattress. That is not the case here. This is a mattress.
This is a growing body mattress.
It's a body. It's a mattress that supports body growth.
Well, and also the kids' mattress is also good for elves and dwarves. Snow White in the latest flick is coming out on TMZ soon. She's got 7 of these things lined up in her bedroom.
On TMZ?
That's why it's coming out on TMZ. She's got 7 of these lined up in her bedroom. But right, folks, everybody is unique. And everyone sleeps differently, but they've got several different models to choose from at Helix with a 100-night free trial, a 10 to 15, well, not a free trial. You got to pay for it. If you're going to send it back, they'll give you your money back. But yeah, they ain't just going to send it to you and let you defile this thing. But they got a 10 to 15-year warranty. So if you're 58 to 62, let's say you might not have to get another one. But anyway, folks, memory foam layers cool down, more responsive foam. They will cradle your body in stomach and back sleeping positions like a baby. And they'll keep you from overheating. They'll do all of these things. And there's no asbestos. Are you aware of this, Brian? We've talked about this before. There's no fiberglass, no asbestos. There's no thumbtacks or broken glass or yard sweepings as well in the Helix mattresses. So we've got that going for us. I don't know how you could be more comfortable. How could you be more comfortable?
You can't. I could be more comfortable if I was actually laying in my Helix Sleep mattress like I want to be right now.
Well, don't let me keep you up. For heaven's sake, don't let me bore you here if I'm just extolling the virtues of these fine things. You can have them delivered to your door in a box and then just open them up and poof, there they go. And folks, right now, Helix is offering up to 30% off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners. And no one else deserves sleep. Definitely not comfort. We want the people who don't listen to us to be as uncomfortable and as sleepless and restless, cranky and irritable as possible. But folks, if you do listen to us, we'll save you money and get you free pillows. Go to helixsleep.com/JCE, helixsleep.com/JCE. The JCE is the important part to save the 30% and get the 2 free pillows. And these things are not just goddamn fun bags either. They're giant full-size pillows.
They're not fun bags, no.
No, not just little fucking dingleberries. They're giant full-size pillows that you can put on a grown person's mattress or a kid's mattress if the kid has a preternaturally large head. helixsleep.com/JCE.